you for joining us, Mr. Joseph Marcus. And this is another episode of Beat and Talk on Tech Bites. It's a privilege to have you on the call, and thank you for giving us time because I know you could be very busy. I mean, you're working at Microsoft, so we cannot expect less. So we'll just go straight right into the discussions that we have for today. If you're
Okay.
watching, this is a good time to subscribe, like, and share. And we have a lot of value we are bringing. And here is another opportunity to learn from someone who has gone ahead, and you can take serious notes and then structure your tech path as well. After somebody who has gone ahead. So just
Mhm.
relax, listen, and enjoy this episode again. Right.
First,
We would like you to just tell us about yourself, your journey as a software engineer, the role you're currently working at in Microsoft, and how you got there. So,
okay, for sure. I am Joseph Marcus, or J Marcus, as I like to be called. Um, I'm currently a software engineer at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft now for 5+ years, but before I joined Microsoft, I started my career like the traditional way. So went to school, did computer science in Nigeria, and then after school got a job then at InterSwitch, and then worked there for a while, and then worked in a number of other like payment companies. And after that, ended up doing the interviews, joined Microsoft. I joined the mixed reality team then, that does all the things around like AR, VR type things. Um, and then now currently, somewhere along the line, I picked up engineering manager role like at Microsoft. And then right now I moved back, recently transitioned back as an IC on the Xbox AI team. So that's my brief history in a nutshell. I feel like I could
I mean,
I
that's very
could
very compressed. When you say you picked up engineering, I'm like, okay, can I also pick it up? Where do I find this to pick up?
I mean, it's on the streets. You can pick it up anytime.
Well. So, I mean, thank you. That's quite concise. I'm sure maybe during the course of this, we'll be able to peek into a few details of how that happened. But
Yeah, sure.
is it, how would you say working at, I mean, you mentioned big places. Interest is kind of big. I mean, but what would you say is the difference in Microsoft is bigger, larger team? So would you
Mhm.
say how you experience differences with working in a smaller, I mean, I don't use the word small for industry because industry is really not small, but
Yeah, I've
compared to
worked at
Microsoft, yeah.
not Interslink. I've
Mm.
also worked at like what you would call startups as well,
All
like
right,
in
all
tech
right.
and switch. So like
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. I mean,
Yeah. Mhm.
I think the big difference is if you think about like the processes and the structure, that's really, I think, the key difference, right? In that, like in big tech, they're a bit more mature with like processes, right? And so things are a bit more rigorous in big tech, right? Because of more processes. There are pros and cons to both, right? Because like in big tech, you have this problem where, like, for example, if you want to actually make a decision, like the decision can be across teams. And so you have to involve a lot of people, talk to a lot of people across the board. And so sometimes that can lead to some bureaucracy, right? Because in a
Mhm.
smaller company, we've
Mhm.
already made a decision. Like
Mhm.
we don't the like overhead of like
Mhm.
communicating with different people and things like that. So that's like the problem you can have in on the big tech side. The counter side of that is like I think that's also important because of the scale at which they are dealing with. And so for example, like if you're releasing products in like big tech like Microsoft, Amazon, and Co, you typically go through a set of like reviews before your product even gets released. So you have like
Mhm.
privacy security reviews that you might not necessarily have in like smaller tech companies.
Mhm.
And rightfully so, right? If you are releasing a product that's on day one, you already has 100 million users. You have to
Yeah.
think about
We
this
have
type
to
of
get
thing.
it right. That's, yeah.
Yeah. And so those are like the fundamental differences. The big tech, in terms of like process and structure, is more mature. For smaller companies, they're a bit more dynamic and adaptive. They can do things faster, as it were. Yeah. And so, and like especially like big, very big companies like Microsoft, right? You really have like that, like a lot of separation, a lot of specialization as well. Because like in smaller companies, you are probably a full stack person, right? So you do
Mm,
everything. Yeah, like front end, the back end, the DevOps, everything is just one
mm,
person, sometimes a couple of people. But
mm,
in big tech, it's somebody specialized on that front end. And even
mm,
in the front end, there's people specialized on different things, right?
mm,
So they have pros and cons. In if you have that experience is good. Like having the breadth of experience in smaller companies is nice because like it helps you like learn a lot of things, right? So you know front end, you know back end, you know DevOps, you know all sort of things, right? But like in big tech, because of like some of that specialization,
mm,
you might be more, I guess it gives you depth as opposed to breadth sometimes. So you get
mm,
deep in really one area and you get really good at it. Yeah. So I
mm.
mean, they have their pros and cons. So, but yeah, that's it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, now, how two questions in one. First of all, what role did you start out in with Microsoft? What role did you start with in Microsoft? And what would you say were the skills that helped you to get that role, your entry
Got
role
it.
into Microsoft? So, apart from the skills, also, the interview process, what was it like? What did you
Sure.
need to know and all that?
Okay. For the getting into Microsoft, so at bigger tech companies, and I think like many tech companies have picked this up now. There are people that, and I'll answer your question, but I just wanted to give a background. There are people that want to do more people related stuff. And then there are people that want to focus on technical leadership, right? And so, especially in bigger tech companies, you have this concept of individual contributor and engineering manager. So those are like the two different legs. Because some people are really passionate about writing code and don't necessarily want to
Mm,
um, be like people's managers, right? And
mm,
so have the option of like, I want to stay as an IC and just like
mm,
contribute constantly in a technical way, or like move to like an engineering manager where like you still need to have obviously technical background and things like that, but you're doing more on the people management side than
mm,
just like our stuff. So that's like the general background of like how it is generally in big tech. And I joined that most people join as ICs. You can join as an EM if you want, but like it depends on the role opening or whatever. And so I joined as an IC, just regular software engineer at Microsoft. Um, for like the process of the interview, this, and I can send links and share like different things that can help, but I think there are like a million and one resources out there that can help like you with the interview process. But just generally speaking, I think there are three things. There's like your coding background and skill. There is, or rather, the interview is structured in like coding, behavioral interviews, and I think the last I would say is system design. So behavioral is like, or let me rephrase, coding, behavioral slash leadership, and then system design. So those are like the three core areas. Now, depending on the level that you're entering into the company, there's a skew towards one or the other, but most interviews
mm,
have those things. If you're joining at entry level, because we don't expect that you have a ton of like background experience, we expect you to be basically good with code, right? Like you should know
mm,
your data structures and algorithms, because those are like fundamental stuff, right? So that's like the core, that's the coding part. And so like if you're entry level, you probably have like two or three of those type of interviews. The behavioral slash leadership, if you're joining at a much higher level, that's very important, right? Because if you're joining as a senior or principal, your ability is no more your ability to write code by yourself, is your
mm,
ability to like, what's the word I'm looking for? Your ability to like get people on board with a vision, as it
mm,
were, right? It's not just like
mm,
You're just not
You.
writing code. Like
Mm,
writing code is like the list of your problem there, right? It's like
mm,
that's like a given. We expect that you know how to write code
mm,
at that point. But like it is more, can you get people on board? How do you work well with people and teams? And then in addition to that, the system design one as well. Like we expect that you built some systems, you know how systems work together, you know how to scale systems, all of those fundamental stuff, right? So like again, it depends on the level you're entering. If you're an entry level person, you get more coding interviews. You will still get system design because you want to at least have an idea of like how systems work. But I think like emphasis will not be laid too much on that. You still get behavioral and leadership interviews. Just like if you hear an entry level person answer a question and you hear a middle level person answer a question and you hear a senior and a principal, you can ask the same question, but the answers will be very different, just like
mm,
based off of that you're entering.
mm,
So I think those are the things to prepare for if you're like aiming for that. Like if you're entry level, like data structures and algorithms are like core, right? And there's a bunch of stuff out there. And I'm not going to argue today about the pros and cons of that whole experience, because I think there are pros and cons. I think it's important to know fundamentals. Like I think it's very important for that. But there's also some extreme angle you can take it to as well that I'm not going to talk about. And so I think those are the core of it,
mm,
if you're preparing for interviews. And there are a lot of resources that help in all those. And I can mention a bunch of them. I think, and there are many of them on YouTube. I think there's this Jordan guy. He has great materials for like system design stuff on YouTube. There's like a life engineer that has like great content for like more behavioral leadership style stuff. And he's also on YouTube. So there are a bunch of like interesting resources. Cracking the coding interview is like the baseline,
mm.
uh, quote
Resource.
unquote
Mm,
resource that most people use. But there are a bunch of other resources. Alex Zhu's materials on system design are also very great for system design stuff. So yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll try and link the in the description of some of these things for people to easily find
Okay.
in the description. Yeah. The question that came to mind when you were talking is how does I know a lot. There's a lot of emphasis on data structures and algorithms,
Yeah.
and I know that sometimes the questions usually tend to some real life scenario questions
Mhm.
when they ask, how do you do this? So they might not necessarily just ask about the data structures and whatever. They might tie it to
Mhm.
some scenarios. So my
Mhm.
question is now, do you, now that you are in Microsoft and
Mhm.
what you went through during the interview and how you had to prepare, would you say that the the level of requirements for the entry matches what you actually meet in? So data structure and algorithm, now you're expected to know it well and know it really pretty well. Now, do you always get to use those things on a day to day, or it's just things that they just want to
Yeah.
have a baseline for everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the problem is, um, and actually not the problem, but I think the way people think about it oftentimes is the fact that like, oh, we just do those like fancy stuff in the interview, and they're like, I don't know, man, I don't use graphs on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's crucial to have that background because, and like big tech, depending on the team, right? It's you use some data structures than others, you use some algorithms than others. But I think that background is important because I think the baseline of it is it helps you think about how to approach problems. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the thing to think about more is it's a
Mm-hmm.
pattern for approaching problems because you would get to especially if you're solving problems at scale, right? A
Mm-hmm.
problem that like
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of millions of users are going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think critically about those data structures, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
like when am I using a list versus a map is very important, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
based off of like even like the scenario that you're dealing with, right? And like how people are going to use the system, like it's important to know it because you will have those opportunities, right? To like actually write code that is important that the thing scales, right? And the thing works really well. Because today you can release the product and I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
50K people are using it, but the next day you have a spike and 10 million people are using it. How does the thing
Mm-hmm.
and I think those are fundamental stuff that are important. And if you even think about like what's that thing we learned, the big O thing, right? Like
Yes.
think about the fact that
Analysis
this
of
is
algorithm.
analysis of algorithms. If you think about, and I found it really interesting because it's not really about how fast your hardware is, right? We remove all of those assumptions, and
Mm,
we say, if I take your algorithm, independent of the machine that I'm running on, is it actually going to be fast, right?
mm,
And those are very, very important. So, and they are applied everywhere. If you think
mm,
about binary tree and all
mm,
of those things, they're applied in all of even these systems that we use, like how databases work, how they index things, and all of that type of stuff. So I think it's important to know it. The fact that you don't use it every day, the truth is you'll find opportunities to use them. And you don't want to, like, I completely agree that there are like more esoteric things that you might not always use from day to day, but just having the idea of what is a binary search tree. I know some people are like, yes, you must know the red black tree, you must know EVL trees. I personally, I don't think you necessarily need to know all the details of that because those things came from research papers that took years sometimes to even like get
mm,
finalized and things like that. And so but knowing the patterns, the concepts, like how am I using this thing is very important because you run into them. Like I've
mm,
had like shell those type of things where like we
mm,
wanted to fill out something and like just the changing how we were doing like the how we wrote the code, just like changing how we did it really mattered. Like
mm,
and so like, or if you don't have that background of like, oh, I'm using a list here versus a
mm,
map or this other data structure,
mm,
then it's going to be hard for you to make those decisions, right? And the trade-offs, because everything is really trade-off. Like there's no perfect data structure. Everything just has trade-offs. And so it's
mm,
like, what am I trading off in this case? But if you don't know those fundamentals, it'll be hard to make those
mm.
decisions.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Just to highlight, I think people should think, so if anyone is thinking, when you're coming to a big tech, is more of the scale and what you can get away with in efficiency in a small place with a few users, you might not get away with at scale. So that's why, those kind of optimizations, they want to know that this is the best way to achieve this so that at scale, your systems are not giving up. Let me for the, for lack of better word. So people should think that if you are watching, that and you want to get into big tech, these are the things you should think about.
Yep.
Awesome, 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 awesome. How does your typical day look like as an engineering, senior engineering, and then senior IC, basically?
Okay, for sure. I think I was saying that like my days are different. Like it's a very nuanced question because my days are different depending on what type of day it is.
Mm,
But in general, you have like different periods, and so it helps to think about like what is happening during that period of time. So sometimes it can be planning, and then after planning phase is done, you want to do some design to ratify those plans. That like okay, we need to improve the system, change something, create a new system, and things like that. And then some other days, atypical days, execution and following up on execution, and things like that. Um, as EM and IC, it's not very different as a senior. The only thing that is different is as EM, I have more regular one-on-ones with my team. And so as EM, I need to
okay.
check-ins basically with my team. So that's the primary thing that probably is the difference then.
Yeah. Cool, 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 cool stuff. So now I know you mentioned about your interview and all. What would you recommend someone who is thinking of joining big tech? What are the programming languages apart from scale? Do you
Okay.
think like big tech have specific languages, or I mean, just be good at the foundations, and then when you come in, you can always pick up? Or what would you advise?
I think it depends on area of focus. So I think there are generic languages you can learn that are generally useful, depending on like they are the generalist languages, right? Like that if you have them, you probably can make it through anywhere. But I think there are also very more specific languages. And so I think it depends. So if you are doing, I'll start with like generalist languages that you can, they are more used on the backend side, but like languages like Java, languages like .NET, and languages like Python. I think those languages are more generally slash backend languages. Um, and so if you have those, also Golang is on that list as well. So I think those are like four languages there. More system lower level languages are like languages like C, C++, Rust. So those are languages that like where like things like performance is very critical. You use them in that case. And then front-end languages, although JavaScript is also used on the back now, right? With like things like Node.js and whatnot. And so JavaScript is a very good generalist language as well. But like more used in the front end, obviously, because that's where the journey started from.
All right now. So the question, another question I was looking at now is this is double-edged, yeah. For both people, this is for people going looking at this is for people looking at uh getting into a senior engineering role or an EM role. And this is for people who are just engineers. Now, what are
Mhm.
the major challenges would you say that you encounter managing teams? So, what would you like engineers to have that will make the work of their managers better? And
Okay.
for the managers, what would you say are the things they need to do to help them manage their team? I don't know if you get.
I see. So you're asking, just to be sure I got the question right. You're saying,
Mm,
as a manager, what do you think would, what are like, what would I characterize as a good engineer that makes
yeah,
it? And you're saying on
yeah.
the, as a manager, what should a manager have to help their team be better? Did I get those
Yeah.
two? Okay,
Yes,
I mean,
yes, yes, yeah, pretty
okay.
much.
Yeah, like I mean, I think those three things I talked about in the interview stage, I think those are also very critical, right? Like when
Mm,
even day-to-day work. And so those are expectations of an engineer in that like I expect you as an engineering IC, especially, I expect you to be able to write code baseline. But again, it depends on level and stuff like that. But like so it's very nuanced to level, depending on the level, like to expect a certain level of contribution. But just generally, like to speak broadly, if you are on a entry middle level type thing, like I would expect that you can write code. I would expect that you can take a problem and solve it, basically, is like the baseline expectation there. And it's not like solve it by yourself necessarily. It doesn't mean that you would not involve a team. There are times you run into problems and you need to involve a team for sure, right? Like nobody's know it all, right? And so there are times you have to do that. Um, and then let's see. Yeah, so I think that that's like my baseline for like a good engineer. You should be able to write code. You should be able to also communicate and work with people. That's the behavioral leadership side because yeah, also not an island, right? You need to
mm,
work with it. And so because some people are great engineers, but they are bad with like working with people. And that's a
mm,
problem by itself too,
mm,
right? Because we don't work in an island, right? We work with people. And so you want to be able to work with people, collaborate, and things like that. I think that's also very
mm,
important. So I think if I could summarize it, the technical skills, soft skills, have
mm,
your base technical skills and have good soft skills for
mm,
it.
mm.
For the manager side, management is a hard job. So what I would say. And it's a thankless job too, is what I
Mm,
would say. But
mm,
for managers, yeah, you need to, I think as a manager, you need to understand your whys, like why you're a manager. Like most people end up becoming a manager just because and like that's to be honest, that's most people's journey. But like your why is very important. And I think your biggest um work as a manager or part of your biggest responsibilities is you want to create clarity for your team. What are they working on? What do they need to be doing and things like that. And then you also want to inspire your team, right? Generate the energy that they need to do their work and things like that. So yeah, you're basically the one steering the direction of the boat, as it were, right, for your team, and then helping
Mm,
your team as needed. I think a crucial part of that is also like investing in your team so that they can grow and become better engineers in different ways. And I can talk about like different ways you can do that practically, but like that's like your biggest goal as a manager, to help your team. Yeah.
awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, and I hope people are getting insight from what um is a busy man to come by. So um, I mean, we'll still talk maybe a few, and maybe let's just use this opportunity. Can you just tell us, if possible, what
Mhm.
currently any projects that you have been part of that people are using now in Microsoft, or that you are working on? Is this obviously mine? If it's not out yet, you can't say anything to that. But at least
Yeah.
the ones that are out, can you give us an idea of where we can find anything that your team or you have worked on? And in addition to that question, in a big tech, we
Mhm.
know that some products don't see the light of day. I mean, they have the resource to experiment, 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 put it out there, doesn't get what they need, kill it. So
Mhm.
would you say there are more of such than the more ones that we see?
These are both interesting questions. The first one, yeah,
Uh,
like I work in the mixed reality space. And so we had, or we have rather, three key products. One of them is, yeah, I mean, we have three key products. So one is Azure Object Anchors. There is Azure Remote Rendering. The main one that a chunk of my time went into was Microsoft Mesh. And so if you Google Microsoft Mesh, you'd find a ton of documents out there on like what it does. The TLDR of it is that like it basically is a product that we built that allows people collaborate in 3D spaces. That's the high level. And then it does it in different ways by providing you avatars that you can put in your meetings, by allowing you build custom environments for your company where you can like have your meeting and things like
mm,
that. Yeah, so I think that's the high level of it, of what Microsoft Mesh does. And my team contributed a big portion to that. Yeah.
awesome.
Okay, and then
So
your second question on like
yeah, like projects, do they see the light
that
of
one,
day?
I think it's very nuanced to like the company, the team, and all of that type of stuff. But yes, obviously, because big tech always experiments, you can imagine that there are products that will never see the light of day. Like it's just by design, right? It's like if you do, and part of it, I imagine, is because you want to stay ahead of the game, right? In like what's happening in
Mm,
technology. And so part of it is like you try a lot of things. Not everything would work out for sure, right? Because and sometimes it's not that the product in itself is bad. There are products that like were just launched before their time and they do not
mm,
succeed, right? And
mm,
so it's not necessarily always a bad product. Sometimes they are bad products. They are bad products.
mm,
They are ideas whose times have not come. They
mm,
are Yeah, and so it depends, like it's very nuanced, or sometimes it's like there's no good market fit for like getting people to actually use it. Or sometimes it's even cost, right? Like if you think about like and it's one of the reasons that like I feel like adoption of like AR and VR is going to probably take slightly longer. Like by adoption, I mean like democratized adoption, like the day-to-day
mm. The
uses it
widespread.
on a
Mm,
day-to-day basis. Um, and part of it is really like the technology, right? Building the technology is expensive, right? And so
mm,
tools that give you that experience is expensive. Um, and like at the end of the day, they're also businesses, right? So they need to charge some amount of money. And so like if you watch like the different launches of like the different devices, I think they're interesting. They're all online. You can look them up. So I think it again is a very nuanced answer. And so the answer to your question is yes, obviously. There are ideas and it happens
mm,
everywhere, like small companies too, right? The
Sure.
only difference I think is probably that small companies don't have the runway to do enough experiments. And that's
Mm,
why, in a way, they have to be focused, right? Because like
mm.
you don't have all the money in the world. And so it's like I need to get this thing out to market very quickly to get to that place where I can now make more and more experiments and do that cycle. Yeah.
So is it like we see in the movies? How is the lunch and the other perks that come with big tech?
These are the issues.
Yeah, big.
Uh, um, yeah, I mean, again, like it's dependent on the big tech company that you work for. So different companies have their different perks, but obviously, like, um, on average, obviously, big tech pays better. They have better benefits than like the regular average company. So those are there, but like free lunch and things like that, I think is all nuance, depends on the companies they are working for. There are big tech companies that don't have free lunch, for example, I think. So actually, yes, no, I think they're actually big tech companies that don't have free lunch. Or maybe you have an Apple, which I don't know if
So
that
so we
anyway.
should then another question.
Mhm.
Your hardware in
Mhm.
Microsoft now, are you allowed to use a MacBook or are you like what's
Yeah,
what's the policy like, for
yeah, I mean that one is that's an interesting question. But yes, like in terms of like use of hardware, I mean we definitely we build for Apple devices, right? So you can imagine
mm.
that you have
True anyway.
I have a
Yeah,
Mac, but, like we
yeah.
build for Apple devices. So yes, people have
Mm,
Macs at Microsoft. But we also have Windows, right? And Windows, like even like generally speaking, like Windows is broadly used, right? More than
sure.
the MacBook, right? And so you can imagine that like we own the Windows.
So maybe the
So
question is really is like if I join Microsoft now, is there a likelihood that as part of my work, maybe as an engineer, I'll be handed a MacBook to say
yeah,
use this for your work?
depends on depends on what you're doing. It's very
Okay.
nuanced. Like that answer, there's no broad general answer to that because it is very nuanced depending on the team, depending on all of those things. So there's no broad Microsoft answer, if that makes sense. Because Microsoft is a
Okay.
very
Okay.
you can be in Xbox that has a different experience and you have
Mm,
experience. You can be in what's it called, the M365, O365 world and have a different experience. So there's no broad answer. But
mm.
obviously, depending on the type of work you're doing, like you can have a MacBook as well.
Awesome, 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 awesome.
Yeah.
All right now. So what advice do you have for junior people, mid
Hmm.
people that want to follow that path and get to the top senior roles and all? What's generally the advice you would give?
Yeah, I mean, I would say three things. I think building, and we've talked about a bunch of them actually. I think
Mm,
building foundational knowledge is very important. I think gaining experience can help as well. Like real world experience, like doing actual stuff, working on actual projects. And like by gaining foundational, in addition to that, I think it's just like curiosity and knowledge in general, right? Because and we can recommend this as one book. It's one of the books I'm currently reading now, and I think he summarized like software engineering as like really two things, right? Our goal is to manage learning and manage complexity.
mm,
Think about it, that's really the work, right? It's like because of the rate at which we release products, you need to be able to learn quickly. And it's both like learning from like learning how my product is doing and things like that in the real world and actual learning, right? Like learning tools, learning all of those type of things, learning what's happening in the real world. And then being able to manage complexity because like software becomes complex very quickly. Uh,
mm,
yeah, so I think I think you must be a learner is really the
mm,
gist of it. And I think the type of learning you optimize for is not, the tools are good, like learning tools are good. And I think it's good to learn
mm,
them. But I think
mm,
learning patterns and
mm,
skill
mm,
better, right? And
mm,
that's why like those fundamentals are useful, right? Because
mm,
it doesn't matter what language I use, the idea
mm,
of a map or a linked
mm,
list still the same
mm,
idea. I can implement it in a different way in a different language, right? And I
mm,
can have like optimizations I do in that language, but the core
mm,
idea is the same. And so
mm,
focusing on learning those patterns, architectural patterns, and those things I think is scalable, right? Like it's
mm,
better to know those principles. But yes, obviously you still need to know how to use it in a tool. And so learning tools
mm,
still matters. But I wouldn't over-index on tooling as I would
mm,
pattern.
mm.
Um, and then I think the last piece is just like if you really, really want to enter into like big tech, obviously you have to prepare for interviews. Like that's just a thing that has to be said. And it can be stressful. There's a whole thing about like preparing for interviews, but I feel like interviews is is really an art than a science. There are general principles that help, but I think it's an art. The more you interview, the more you get better at interviewing. And so that's the other one. So, I mean, it goes without saying, right? Prepare your resume, do all those standard stuff, which there are plenty tools to help you figure this out. Um, but like, I think the mindset though that I think people should have with interviewing is don't go with an outcome-based mindset, go with a learning-based mindset. Because we tend to go to interviews with an outcome in mind. And like rightfully so, I do the same thing, right? Like if I go to an interview, I go because I want the job, obviously. But I think a learning-based approach helps in that, like, because learning-based approach is good in that, like, you learn what you didn't know. Like, I'm going to the interview to learn. Is that like I'm definitely going to obviously express how I can be of benefit to the company and things like that. But I'm also going to learn. Like, these people are smart people. What can I learn from them? And I also learn things I did not know before, right? And things like that. So I think that's how I would suggest people think about it. But I've said a lot of words. I
No, no,
didn't.
they are really valuable. I mean, really. So,
Oh, but the learning one,
mm.
100%. I can talk about learning from now till tomorrow. Um, like I think it's absolutely important. And I don't advise it for everyone, but like for me, like I don't have I mean, as much as I have in terms of financial capacity, I do not have a cap on my learning, quote unquote.
Mm,
Obviously, there's a cap
mm.
constrained by like,
But
like
yeah,
the situation of my personal
yeah.
circumstance. Like if I see a book today and I'm like, oh, this book is going to help me, I don't even think twice, I just buy it. Which
Mm.
is problematic because now I have a couple of books I'm in chapter two. But but like I think it's crucial to have that learning mindset where like
Mm,
and the other thing is like with the internet, there is a ton of content
mm,
on YouTube alone. Like I feel like YouTube is a university. Like you can literally get a ton of free content without
mm,
even buying.
mm,
At some point, obviously, you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? And you have to pay sometimes. So
mm.
yeah, I think learning cannot be overemphasized, really. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
That's
Now
a
talking about artificial intelligence,
problem.
what what do you
Yeah.
say about that and how the effect it will have in maybe engineering processes? You mentioned your VR and AR projects that you work on. So I think two things. First of all, what impact will AI have over, in engineering and the processes that we're facing? And two is the applications of it. Do you see us at what point do you think we are at now with the whole artificial intelligence, with even the AR thing and VR as well? What would you say? Like, what are your opinions on that? And
Yeah.
the reason I'm asking this question is such that, you know, because of career choices,
Mhm.
people might begin to think, okay, uh, maybe I don't just do the regular engineering thing. Can I specialize in this and that? So, yeah.
So that's fair. I mean, it goes without saying, right, that AI is definitely useful and AI is going to the way that I think we have I don't know, computers and they have ubiquitous now, right? It's just normal to have a computer. and it's normal to have a mobile phone, I think we would get to a world where it is
Mm,
normal that AI and all of the big, like different areas of AI, because AI is very broad field, uh, are applied on a day-to-day basis. As to like where we're at, I think AI is definitely advancing very quickly. All right. And the way I think about it is going back to my learning point is that like the people, the difference in the engineer of tomorrow is the one who knows how to use AI will be
mm,
10x or 1000x faster than the one who doesn't. Right.
mm,
So I think many people approach AI with a, and you should approach AI in some ways in a pessimistic mindset. There are like things we should be worried about, obviously. Like, I don't think like is either or. I think we should be definitely trying to shape like how we're using those things and all of that. But on the flip side, I think there are like optimistic ways of looking at it as well, of
mm,
like this tool can actually improve my productivity, right? And so, for instance, like a very simple example is like GitHub Copilot, right? Um, and then a number of other like tools like
By
that
the way, Microsoft owns GitHub now. I mean, for a while
that
now.
I mean, anyway, but like GitHub Copilot, for example, right? You can imagine that like if you're not using GitHub Copilot, you might be slow. And it doesn't mean you're a bad engineer, right? But like it's like, oh, I have the idea in my head. I know what I want to do, but I just don't know like how quickly I can do it. And so GitHub Copilot really helps. Like you run into a bug and then you say, "Oh, why am I running into this bug?" And so it can
Mm,
improve the product. It's the thing that like normally you would have gone to Stack Overflow for, right? And go and
mm,
check and figure out the answers. But it's kind of taking it around and bringing the
mm,
answers to you as much as it can, right? And I found it really useful in things like quick prototyping. Like I know what I want in my head, but I don't really know maybe the language in depth to like figure out like the semantics of what they're talking about. And I'm like, okay, like this is what I want to do. How do I write a script that does this? And it gives me templates, for example. And I take the
mm,
template, I end up understanding what it is doing. But like the process of doing that, and again, yes, it does. You can again argue for or against. There's always this conversation is always very nuanced, but in getting me to do the job quickly, it has like helped my productivity.
mm,
You can argue that like for a learning phase, right, where sometimes the rigors of learning also help sometimes, but like again, if you can improve that process, really, like why not? And that's just like GitHub Copilot. There are other ways that like you can have AI like help, like think of like even AI tools that you can use on Zoom, for example, right? Well, like you record a meeting and you can have like AI read the transcript. And instead of me like spending like 2 hours like watching a recording, you can ask the tool that like, hey, what did Timmy even say about X? Right. And then it can summarize, or it can tell me, yes, Timmy said this. And if I feel like, oh, this AI is saying things that I don't know what it's talking about, I can go to that specific place in the recording then and just watch that part, right? So that way I've improved my productivity, right? Because I didn't have to spend 2 hours to listen to the thing. I just had a thing summarize the gist of what you were trying to say. And so I think that like people who know how to use the tool are going to be better positioned than people who don't. And it's that's really how life works, right? Like when the whole technology revolution came, right? People who knew how to use the tools are always better positioned than people who don't. And so I think it's like we would have new skills, we would have new industries that we don't even know exist. Like because of technology and like the social media thing, right? We have industries that did not exist before. Like if you came up like, I don't know, 25 years ago and said you want to be a YouTube content creator as a career path, people will look at you sideways are like, what are you talking about? Right. But like because of that revolution, we have a completely different industry that did not exist before. And so that's how I think about AI as well. There are industries that don't exist right now that will start to exist, right? And so knowing how to use those tools really matter. As to like, will AI replace my job? Like, I think jobs are going to change, like generally speaking. And so learning these tools is important, right? specifically on software engineering, I think that like you should still get into software engineering because I think you are in a better position to understand what the AI is doing than like you not being there, right? And then you also have an opportunity to even shape these conversations, right? Because it's us that are all figuring it out together, right? And so you have a unique context, you have a unique view of the world, right? And so it's important to have like everyone in it like be there because like we all bring our individual context and we can help shape this thing and become to make it become better for everyone. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful. And on the final note, if we want to reach out to you, what can we do? Can people reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Ask
Are
for
you
pilot.
on?
uh, I
Oh.
usually ask for pilots, but uh, yes, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me most. I mean, I have a Twitter account that's rarely used, so you can't really find me on
So
Twitter. I think
so
LinkedIn is.
we can drop your LinkedIn profile
Oh
on
yeah,
the
absolutely,
description. So
absolutely. I'm happy to talk to people over LinkedIn. Yeah.
all right then. So if you are watching, I'm sure this has been insightful for you, and we hope to bring more. So this is a good opportunity for you to spread the word, spread the value that you are getting, like, share, and subscribe to everybody and everyone. And like this video specifically, we
Please.
could use that. Yes, thank you. We could use that to bribe Joseph to come back if his video gets the best and the most engagement. We can-
Not AI likes, it's the real ones. I'm
the
kidding.
real ones. Yeah, so yeah, we appreciate you coming, and we hope to have much more interactions on other issues as they come up. Thank you so much for your time.
100%.
Yeah.